Hello, everyone. Thanks again for joining us today for the Process Simulator 2016 Service Pack 1 What's New webinar. We're going to get started. My name is Steve Heckler. I'll be your moderator today. Just a couple quick housekeeping items first. This webinar is being recorded, and you will all receive an email with a link to the recording. We'll also be posting it in our Solutions Cafe and to our YouTube channel, where we have many other how-to videos put together for you by our tech support team. We will use the GoToWebinar chat window for your questions, so feel free to submit a question at any time, and we'll answer it during the discussion if that makes the most sense. If not, we'll be sure to answer them at the end during the Q&A. Now I'd like to introduce our presenters. First, Kevin Field. He is a Senior Product Manager at ProModel and is responsible for the Process Simulator development. And we also have Bruce Gladwin with us today. Bruce is the VP of our Commercial Products Group, overseeing all of ProModel's commercial products as well as our consulting services team. Kevin's going to kick it off, so over to you, Kevin.
Thanks, Steve. Appreciate that. Well, hello, everybody. For some of you, it's a good morning. For some of you, it's probably a good afternoon or evening, depending on where you are from and joining us today. Well, hopefully, you guys have been prompted at this point with the new Process Simulator release. We officially made it available to all of our customers our time last night, about 12 hours ago. Hopefully, you've even had an opportunity to download and install it. If not, maybe after this presentation you will, and you'll be able to go in and try out all the new features that I'm going to show you today. So, for Process Simulator 2016 Service Pack 1, what is new, right? That's why we're here, to find out what's new. Well, one of the things is we've added some capability for you to get the resource utilization statistics in your logic during simulation. And we're going to talk about that in more detail as we go here. Also, the ability to identify what unit of a resource that you have captured. We also added the capability to initialize your routing percentages, those routing connections that are based on percentages from external data, and that's through the use of an array. We've also simplified the naming for array export. And lastly for this, we're going to talk about the ability to export your statistics that are generated from your simulation model programmatically, that you can from an external program, for example, like VBA, be able to get those statistics. Well, in more detail, the first one that we talked about, resource utilization statistics. Well, this is accomplished through the %util function. Now, the %util function we've had previously, but it was really only for activities. You could only get the percent utilization from an activity. Now you can do it with a resource. So as a percentage, it is returned as a percentage value, similar to the percent utilization that you basically see in the output viewer in your summary statistics. Now it can be captured, that resource utilization can be captured by a specific unit if you want to get that information, or as a summary of all units. For example, if you have an operator and it has 10 units, you could get operator 5, or maybe just say operator and it gives you the summary of all 10 units. And this new function is accessible only in freeform logic, not in our builder logic. So let's move on over to our process simulator, and we'll go through a quick demo on how this works. So in this simple example, I just have a work unit coming into an activity. I want to show how an example of how you might utilize this. At the activity, then let me open up the properties and go to freeform logic. As you can see, we have 5 different units of this worker resource. And all I'm going to do at the activity is really just use the worker for a period of time, one of those units of a worker, and then wait a period of time that is not needed, this task time, possibly it's a drying time or something else, let's say, where the worker is not needed. And this is just to give some utilization of a worker and then some time without the utilization. Again, I'm going to keep this really simple. We're only going to have 5 entities come in just so that we can understand the output of the percent utilization of this resource. Sorry, let me get to simulation properties, because what I've done really in termination logic in the free form of this, if we look over here, I'm going to just expand this a little bit for you so we can see this, is what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in and I'm actually going to write out this statistic here at the end of each replication. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to write it out to an array. So I've set up an array called y custom stats, and it has basically 4 different columns of data. It's going to output the worker name, what type of unit it is. In this particular case, we are going to just get a summary of all the workers. Okay, so I'm going to say all for the unit number. And then the utilization, I'm going to call the %util function, and I'm just going to pass worker as the parameter. And that's how you do it for getting the summary of a worker. If you want to get a unit, a specific unit, you specify the worker, and then as an optional parameter, a comma, and then the unit number, and that's how you get the specific one. But in this particular case, I may want to be collecting my own custom statistics, and I may want to know what the % utilization of this worker resource type is, and I'm going to log this out to this array. And in this array then, per replication, and so the last value I'm going to log out to the array is this get replication number, okay? And that tells me which replication I'm on, and then I know. Now, this is simple, of course, right? Maybe you want to do this for multiple resources, but we're just going to do one. Okay, so this is the simplified way of doing this, so we don't get too much data. And let me go here. As you can see, we're running 5 replications. I'm going to say OK. And then I'm just going to simulate this. Now, this is going to go pretty fast. It's only going to run 5 replications. As you saw, there's only 5 arrivals right at the beginning, just so we can keep our data simple. Now, I am not going to go to the resource statistics. However, one other thing that I wanted to show, actually, is how the array is set up. And I'm exporting this, okay, this data, to an array. It's going to a sheet called %util, and it's going to start in cell A2. And I decided to only export after the final replication. So let's go to that file, the Excel file that was exported. Sorry, it's coming up here on my other monitor. Bring this up. Now here's the %util tab, and it is written out for each replication. As you see, the worker name starting in A2, cell A2, like I'd specified, saying that it's all units, gave me the % utilization. It's telling me which replication that it's from. Now, if you think about this, if you had multiple resources, resource types that you wanted to write this out, you have a bunch of information now, and in a format that is very simple to be able to create pivot charts and other things from within Excel. You could also add in a scenario name if you wanted to, and then be able to do your pivot tables and pivot charts based on scenario name, and then be able to average your replications across, average your utilization across replications, of course, as well. So that is the simple way to be able to export this data on get this data on % utilization for a resource and be able to export it from Process Simulator. All right, let's go back. Okay, so the next new feature that we added was the ability to understand what resource unit you have captured. Okay, now this is accomplished through a new function called owned resource unit. It behaves very similar to the owned resource. Hopefully you had that thought as soon as you saw it. It is very similar to that. In fact, it functions exactly the same way, but whereas the owned resource will return the index number of the resource type that you have captured. The owned resource unit will return the exact unit number of that resource type. So I anticipate that people will actually be using both of these functions together, most likely, to understand which resource they captured and what unit it is. Now, just like owned resource, if no number is specified within the parentheses, then it returns the unit of the most recent resource captured by the entity. But if you do specify a number, it returns the unit of that nth resource captured by the entity. So the very first resource that you captured could have been 3, 4 process steps before. You'd put a 1 in parentheses, and that's the oldest resource that you've captured, and it would return that unit. Again, this is also only accessible from freeform logic. Okay, let's go in and look at a simple demo here. I'm going to close this because we're going to write to that file again. Let me go to my next page. For owned resource unit, now very similar, it's a very similar setup, but in this particular time, we are not going to write out at the end of each replication. Instead, I'll bring this up. There we go. And if you look over here in my freeform logic, what I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to write out the amount of time that this entity was processing at this particular activity, and I'm going to write out which resource unit it was that I captured. Okay, so here I come in and I've created a local variable called cycle time. I assign the clock time at the very beginning of the process step. I get the worker wait a particular period of time, and then I capture the amount of time that that took. Okay, and then I'm going to increment this row in the array so that each time I am going to log out a new value, it's going to go to the next row in the array. So the very first column for that row is going to be the resource name. The second column is going to be the owned resource unit, so I know which unit of that resource that I've captured. And then the last value is going to be that cycle time that I just captured. Okay. So again, in this particular case, right, I'm going to use any one of the 5 workers. I only have 5 entities coming in to keep it simple, but of course, as with any model, you can have many coming in, but just for this example, we're going to keep it simple. Okay. Now, the other thing, let's see, that I did, I don't think I'm running, no, just one replication, that's right. So I'm not capturing the replications, which I could, I very well could. That's something that you could add on there if you're running multiple replications and get all that data if you'd like. So similar to the last one, with this array, I am exporting it to my Excel sheet, but this time it's in the owned resource unit sheet starting in A2. Okay. In fact, I'm just going to open that up real quick just so we can see, bring that back up and go to the second tab here, which is my owned resource. Now I've already set it up where I've put the column headers in, which is why I want to specify that it starts in cell A2 for this. Okay. Let me close that back down because I'm going to write to it during the simulation. And now let's simulate here. Again, this is going to go pretty quick because there's only 5 entities, so that all 5 of the units are utilized. I'm not going to go out to my output viewer, and then I'm going to come back down and we're going to go to the Excel file, to the owned resource unit tab, and it shows, and you can even see what order that it was completed at least. The 5 entities came in. The first, I'm sorry, unit number 4 was the one that completed first in that cycle time of 4.4 minutes and so forth all the way down. Again, if you could imagine that multiple entities coming in here and you logging this data out to this array, you can know different units and what they are actually doing and how much time at that particular activity. You could also summarize it as you want, just like we did on the last one, and just get a summary value as well. Okay. All right. Let's go on to the next. The next feature that we implemented was the routing percentage that you can change and modify or initialize from external data. And that external data is coming from an Excel file, in this particular case, through importing into an array. So in this particular case, we opened up the capability to change the percentage routing based on an array and allow an array to be there. Now the array itself, the only way that this will really work is if you initialize the array from the Excel file. So again, it has to be imported. The data has to be imported from Excel. That's what has to be specified for the array. And then you go in and you can replace the routing percentage value that you may have set there and put that specific array cell reference instead. And again, the percentages must add up to 100%. Now, because at edit time when you're doing this, it doesn't really know what those values are until you start the simulation. You won't receive any kind of indicator like you might normally do when you're putting straight numbers in there, and Process Simulator can evaluate that at edit time. That won't occur until you go to run the simulation, and then it should say something to you. And one of the disadvantages is that the percentage values are not displayed on the routes. Anybody who's used macros for scenarios, different scenarios, doing the routing percentage, you probably already have seen that the values don't show up on the routes. But you can kind of work around that, and I'll show you how I've done that in this example. Okay, let's go back to Process Simulator. There we go. Go to my array routing percentage. Get another simple model here. Box coming into activity, and there's 3 different routes that are coming out, going to the next activities. I'm going to bring up the properties here, so you can see what I've done. So the first one, now I've set up an array called y%route, and it has 3 different rows which are going to specify. In fact, let me bring up the Excel file real quick again, just show you how simply I've set that up. Might be the easiest way to do it. Coming into the routing. So in this routing, in this routing tab, this is what it is. I've got one column, and each row is a different percentage. As you can see, this adds up to 100%. So those are going to be the values of these route percentages. So the first one is y%route 1, 1 and that's my specific cell reference there in the percent field of the percentage routing. The next routing connection is y%route 2, 1, and the third one is 3, 1, as you can see there. If I quickly go into the array, you can see that it's being imported from that file, from the routing tab, like you saw, starting in cell 1. Very simple. Now, the next thing I've done is I've actually created, should have stayed in there, I've actually created 3 variables to use to display the percentage that comes through and from the array. And I've actually done their initial values. You can see the same thing. It is initial value is set from that array as well. So this is my way to get around not being able to display. Now, obviously, at edit time, it doesn't show it, but at runtime, I'll be able to see what those values are. And let me get right to that as we simulate. All right. So, as you can see, it was 10, 70, and 20. And that's what our routing percentages are set up to do. Very simple, easy, it's nice. Now the power in this, of course, right, is that you can go back to your Excel file and you can change it from there, or have somebody that you've built this model for, perhaps at your company, to do some different analysis. Maybe you've set it up that this Excel file is fed data maybe from a database, and maybe it's refreshed every once in a while with new data based on the actual system you're coming from. You can get the historical data and maybe come up with these percentage values and have it populate an Excel file. And then that Excel file, once it's changed and you just run the simulation again, it can come with new values. So let's change this here. I'm going to change this to 30 and the next one to 60. This is what I really wanted to do. Let's save that. Just going to close it. And now when I simulate, you can see that those values have changed, and so the percentages are going to be updated, and it's going to take that. You'll see most of them are going to be coming down here, of course, those box entities. All right. Well, like I mentioned, we had this capability to be able to do macros in the percentages, which gives you the ability to, from Scenario Manager, change those percentage values. Now you also have the ability to do this from external data. Next, so the sheet naming for array export. Now the first couple examples we did some array export, and there's an option in there, and this really only applies, this new kind of capability, this enhancement that we added really only applies if you are running multiple replications. Okay, so the array data export for multiple replications, you have the option to export that data from your array after every replication, or there's a little checkbox that says export after final replication only. Now, when you do that, your sheet names, because you can have lots of data depending on how many replications you run, your sheet names get, whatever sheet you're writing or exporting out to, it gets a suffix added to it based on the replication number. We try to keep it small because Excel has a limited number of characters you can use for the sheet name. So in this particular example, or how Process Simulator works, is that it takes replication 1, just calls it R1 or R2, R3, depending on how many you have, and it will create all of those sheets based on the replication. Now it gets more complicated as you add scenarios. So let's say you have 5 scenarios with 10 replications each. The first set, as it exports every single scenario and replication, scenario 1, replication 1, scenario 1, R2, S1, R3, etc. And then the next is scenario 2, S2, R1, S2, R2, S2, R3. So you can see if you had 5 different scenarios with 10 replications, that's a lot of different sheets. Well, that's how that works. However, you may only want to export on the final replication only. Let's say that you are perhaps using the array to calculate your own statistics, and you're averaging the replication data as it's running. In order to do that, you have to set the array to not clear the array data between replications, but to keep it. And by doing that, you can kind of keep a running average, and at the end of the last replication, you can do your summary and then export it on that final replication. Well, some of you may have noticed this. If you have that checked, and if you change the number of your replications, then it writes out to a different sheet. So for example, let's say you ran 5 replications first and you check to only export on the final replication. You're going to see something like this. That sheet name is going to be R5. And then if you change the number of replications, the next thing you know, its sheet name is going to be sheet R10. It's a different sheet. And now what this allows you to do is that if you have that checked, it won't change the sheet name. Now, why is that important, you may be asking? Well, if you are doing custom statistics and you're trying to write out to it, sometimes you're taking that data, maybe in Excel or VBA, or doing some formulas like VLOOKUPs and other things to take the data that's being written out, and you're writing it to another sheet, or you're summarizing in some other way. And if the sheet name keeps changing, then it's difficult to really keep that formatting and be able to know which sheet it's going to be. So really what this does is it allows you to retain the sheet and the formatting in that particular sheet. So it's just kind of a nice little thing that we've done and added in there for those purposes. So it keeps all of that formatting. You may not even be pulling the data off of it. Maybe you're just formatting it with nice column highlighting and colors and bold and whatever else you're doing. That way you can keep it on that sheet and it consistently writes it out, regardless of the number of replications that you've run. Okay, the last feature that we want to talk about is the programmatic export of your statistics. Now, this is an API, which is an application programming interface, which is called ProModel OV Export 1.0. So it's our first version of this. So when you're trying to reference this, let's say in Excel or another application, another programming application, then that is the object that you're looking for to be able to access the API. So you can do and use VBA in Excel, you can use C#, C++, whatever it is. You can use a programming language to be able to pull data and extract it out of your RDB, RDT files, which are the files that are generated by Process Simulator when it creates the statistics from the simulation running. Now, it can export as raw data or as summarized data. Now, what I mean by summarized is in Process Simulator, you have different options to be able to display the data. There's the first section in your filter options on the left, if you're familiar with Output Viewer. The first shows your scenarios. The next section of data is this data display, where you can do grouping, whether it's no grouping at all, or you can do a periodic average. And if you choose periodic average as your grouping, then that interval you can set up, it could be hourly, it could be daily, it could be every 15 minutes, whatever it is that you're doing, but that data display is there. And then it's all the different items that you can select. Now this is mostly for your time series, what I'm specifying here. But it allows you, Process Simulator or Output Viewer has the ability to manually export this data. Like there's an export tab. You can say, okay, I want to export either the raw data out to Excel, or if a chart is being displayed and you've got its display options with grouping and its interval, how you like it, you can export that chart data. Again, that's all manual though. But this new API that we have gives you the ability to export it programmatically. And the power in this is that the results match Output Viewer. In other words, if you export programmatically the data, just as it was grouped on a periodic average and an interval, it will do that averaging for you. So you don't have to get the raw data and then average it yourself or manipulate it yourself in Excel. You can bring it into Excel already summarized. Well, let's go into a demo here and I'll show you more what I'm talking about. Let me bring up a new Excel file. Let's see. All right, this is the one I want. I'm going to maximize that. Now, here what I've done is I've created an Excel sheet that is going to get some important information that's needed as part of this Output Viewer export. Okay, one of the things that you need to specify is an RDB file. Now, for those of you that have paid attention and seen how we export our RDB data, which is the summary data, you have seen that it is named the model name dot scenario name dot RDB. Now, when you want to get whether it's a summary data, which is any data out of your summary, which is RDB file, or any of your time series, which is the RDT file, either one, you only have to specify the RDB file. The methods that you call to get the summary or time series data, doesn't matter which one, you can always just specify the RDB, and it doesn't matter which scenario you call as well, because it will know based on what else you specify, which data and where to get it. So we try to keep it real simple. All you have to do is just put the RDB file there and pass that, and it makes it easy. Again, I'm using Excel kind of like an interface, and I'll go into the programming code here in a second, the VBA code, and show you what it looks like. Now, scenarios then is another one that I'm trying to capture, just kind of giving a simple little interface to do. And what you do is you can say, okay, I want to add my scenarios here and make it comma delimited. I can, if I want to, just put one scenario. But if I put multiple scenarios, then I'm going to separate them by commas. Okay. And then the last thing is here is what am I doing on my grouping? In this particular case, I'm doing a periodic average. Instead of writing that whole thing, we're just going to say average. Okay. Now this particular one is tied to, as you can see, this call center demo, which let me bring that up real quick, just so you guys can see it. This is one of our demos that we have specified, or that comes with Process Simulator. And I'm using this one to get some data out of it. And this particular one has 4 different scenarios. And I'm going to pull scenarios from 2 of them. I think it's the increased calls and the less tolerance scenario. So I've run these already, and I have my output. So let me go back. And so those are the 2 scenarios that I'm going to pull. So let me bring up, let me get this. Of course, it comes over in the other window here. Let me bring up my VBA code so you can see what it looks like. Okay. So what I've done is come through this little subroutine that I've created called export OV data. And one of the things that you'll want to do is reference, there's that object, the ProModel OV export 1.0. I've referenced that. And coming down here, let's see, the first thing I'm going to do, you can see that I'm pulling the RDB file from the cell, from the control sheet. I'm pulling the scenarios. And the scenarios, they come in as a string. The RDB file is a string, all of this stuff. And replication options. I'm also pulling, those are the 3 that I'm pulling. So then I come down, and in here I've chosen to put in the VBA code what variable name it is that I'm actually going to pull the data out of those 2 scenarios, if you remember back on the control sheet. Okay, I could have very easily put this variable name also as an option, as an element name that I wanted to pull. In this particular case, I've just put it in here. Okay, now this is where I actually initialize this object. Okay, I'm going to call it an OV object as a new ProModel output viewer export dot data export. Okay, and then this is what I call, so it's OV dot export time series. So this is the function for getting the time series. This is in that object, that ProModel output viewer export object. And the parameters for it, you can see right here, is an RDB file name, the time units that you want to summarize the data in, and this could be, in this particular case, I want it to come back averaged in minutes. Okay. The next parameter is actually the Excel file that you want to write it out to. But you have an option here. You can either write the specific Excel file that you want to export this data to, or if you don't, it just has, here's empty quotes. What happens is if there is no Excel file, it will return this data as a string. And so what this one's going to do is it's going to return it to this data object that I've specified up here as a string, and it's delimited. So that's something, if you do this, you have to parse it and then do with it what you want. If you write it out to an Excel file, you can do that. If you bring it into some other data object, then you just got to parse it out that particular way. This one, we're not going to go into how that's done, but that, for this example, that's what we've done. And really all we're going to do with it is just put it in one of the sheets in this file. So that is the Excel file name. Here we have then our list of scenarios, and then the time series elements, which is only 1 at this point. In the same way with scenarios, if you want to do more than 1 element and get that out, it's comma delimited, just like the scenarios are. Okay. And then my replication options, this particular case, if you remember, it was averaged. And this last one is another one as well. It's, sorry, the last parameter is telling me how I want to average it. It's going to be a periodic average, and the interval is going to be every 15 something. Well, come back to this time unit, and that's what it's for. It's going to be every 15 minutes. I'd specified here that I want it to be minutes, and so this is telling me it's periodic with an interval of 15. Okay, so that's what it's going to do. It's going to pull this data. Then I do this extra thing where this is where I pass the data to this, and I'm saying which sheet it's going to come to, and it goes from there. Okay, so let me go back. Let me close this, and here is the sheet that I'm going to pull the data. So let me just hit export, which calls my function, and it's done. And I come in here, and it's set all of this data here. Now, what I'm going to do actually is let me go back into my call center, and let me just simulate that so we can get to the results. And I want to bring up this chart in Output Viewer to show you the one that I'm going to do. I'm going to turn off the animation, get to Output Viewer, and it should bring up our time plot. So there's our two scenarios, increased calls and less tolerance. Notice it is the periodic average every 15 minutes, which is, again, that's what I specified to programmatically pull out. I want to compare the two. So I've already done that, and it is for the vCycle time process call. So this is what it looks like over time, every 15 minutes. Okay. Now, the nice thing is the way the export works now, this programmatic export, is that it puts it in a nice format. Notice I have all the scenarios here. If I scroll down, you can see it goes from increased calls to less tolerance. It tells me what type of averaging of it. Now, if I said I wanted to get all replications instead of a periodic average, it would give me a replication number here. This tells me the element name, which could be different, right? If I had more than one element, there might be more data here. This is the time. It's in 15-minute increments. It's coming through, and this is the value, that periodic average value over those 15-minute increments. Now, the cool thing is that by putting it in this format this way, scenario, replication, element, and so forth, gives you the ability to use Excel's pivot table and pivot chart. So all I need to do is highlight this data and then go to the pivot chart capability here and generate something just like this. Here's my pivot table. Here's my pivot chart. And if we look, I can move this over, actually pull this off. I guess, can I go over a little bit more? And then I'm going to bring up Output Viewer right there. Maybe I'll make him a little bit smaller, and you can see, I can get it, that the data looks pretty similar. Should be exactly the same, basically, right? So I have just basically, through the API, have regenerated this in Excel in the same way. And all I didn't have to do any averaging or anything else, because the API did that for me. I told it to do a periodic average every 15 minutes. That's how it gave me the data. I was able to bring it up and in the same way. So the nice thing is that I didn't have to do that averaging, and I could recreate this chart and do something different actually if I want to. But I'm getting the exact same results as I see in Output Viewer. Now, there's a lot more capability in that, and we have some documentation on it, which goes through and describes the different parameters and what you can specify for each one. For example, here's the one that will get your summary data, which is things like resource states and entity states and your resource and location utilization, those kind of things. Right? Here's all the different types that you can pass on what you're getting. If there's some kind of errors, it even returns different errors as well. If you specified something that wasn't correct or it didn't know what you meant. So we've got some documentation that we can also give you on this as well. Let me just minimize that. All right. So, Process Simulator 2016, SP1, we gave you the ability to acquire resource utilization statistics through the %util, expanding that function. Identify captured resource units through the owned resource unit, new function. Can initialize routing percentages using arrays now and external data. We've simplified the sheet naming for array export on that final replication. And we've given you this programmatic export of statistics. Are there any questions?
Devin, thanks. This is Bruce. I wanted to, first of all, thank you for going through that. One of the questions that came to my mind right away was on the arrays, being able to use those for the routing percentages. And
yes.
It came to my mind that a customer might want to use the same spreadsheet as most of our customers are aware. They can export the entire data structure of a process simulator model out to Excel. They might want to use that same spreadsheet to include their routing percentages. If they were to add another tab to that spreadsheet, would that be something that they could do?
And then from that tab, initialize the percentages, the other tab,
yes.
the new tab?
Yes.
Yes.
They would have to, of course, create, export the data first.
Yes.
And then once they have that spreadsheet, they should be able to use that, correct?
Definitely. Yep.
Okay, great. The rest of you, if you have a question, you can raise your hand and then type your question in, and we'll take that. Okay, a question. Why would, given that you can export the data, time series data directly from output viewer, what would be an advantage of using this programmatic method that you showed at the end?
Good question. It's a great question because you can just export it manually. Well, if you have a lot of different charts that maybe you've even set up with an output viewer, and if you have to manually go through and export the data from that chart, for example, maybe I could bring up something really quick here in Process Simulator. Let's see. Let me bring this up. Again, because you can do an export of, for example, your time series data, and it brings up, I might have to wait here a second, it brings up this little dialog for selecting all these things and being able to export it. This just does it, the raw and specific replication data. And then you have to do all the averaging yourself, so within Excel. That's one disadvantage of this. Whereas if you programmatically do it, you can bring it in already summarized across all the replications. Or if you have a bunch of different charts that you've set up just like this one, think of even 10 different charts that you have. You have to, if you want to get this exact periodic averaging, what you have to do is you have to say, oh, I want to export this chart data. So you use this, it goes through, it says, okay, well, let me export this to Excel. And you have to do that for each chart unless you've got it within the same report, which is on this same, reporting tab. Maybe you have 3 or 4 here, and all 4 of them can get exported, possibly. But I still think it does it for a report as well. I guess it does all the data here in this way as well. But it's a manual thing that you have to do. Go through and manually do it. Whereas if you're in a presentation, you're doing other things, you may want to set it up to just have it automatically do that, and then export it to Excel. And maybe you have something then that also will take that data and bring it into another sheet or summarize it in some other way. It's a request that we had from a few of our users that they want to just be able to set it up and programmatically do it and not even have to come in and open up Excel to get the data. New data every time you run multiple replications or multiple scenarios. You can just have it with the press of a button in Excel and you've got that data. So it saves some steps and some time.
Right. Okay. Next question was a user would like to know if we can provide a copy of the VBA code that you showed.
Absolutely. What we'll do is we'll work with our support team, and we will post that and make it available, not only the documentation, but even this little example VBA code. We will do that, yes.
Okay. If you have other questions, go ahead and type those in the question field there. Another question here. Question is, when might we see the ability to have shift definitions inside the scenario manager?
That's a good question. We don't necessarily have plans right now, although that is a feature that is in our feature request list. We will have to see, I guess. We don't have anything set right now at this time to implement that.
Well, Bruce and Kevin, it sounds like that might be all the questions for today. So I'd like to really thank Bruce and Kevin for presenting, and would like to thank all of you for attending. And everyone have a great day. Thank you very much.